23 or talk to your broker to get your kind of care.
The report aims to highlight the problem of obesity and overweight in children, particularly children under 5. We're living in environments where there are more and more processed foods. These processed foods are cheaper in many cases than healthier alternatives. We have aggressive and sophisticated marketing techniques, particularly towards children, to increase consumption of these energy-dense, high-fat, high-sugar foods, as well as we have an environment where people have insufficient information to make food choices. A young child who is obese finds it very difficult. Frequently, they don't access the weight management services that they need. They could be bullied at school, and frequently children who are overweight become overweight and continue to be overweight and obese during adolescence and adulthood. And this has very serious health consequences. We see that these kind of consequences could include increased cardiovascular disease, increased heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, as well as some cancers, as well as degenerative joint diseases. So the health consequences are very, very severe.
So childhood obesity is one of the most serious public health challenges of the 21st century. The prevalence is increasing at an alarming rate. Now, almost half of all overweight children under the age of 5 in the world live in Asia, and about a quarter live in Africa. Now, the problem with overweight and obesity in children is that, they're likely to stay obese into adulthood with a greater likelihood of developing non-communicable diseases such as diabetes and heart diseases. The good news, however, is that the problem of overweight and obesity is largely preventable. So as we get into the new year, what role can you play in preventing childhood obesity? Well, this is the focus of our discussion today. And joining me in this discussion is an expert panel consisting of a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a dietitian, and a health advisor from Save the Children SA. So sit back and learn from this exciting show ahead. You can tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. I'm Dr. Sello Mataung, and this is Health Talk.
Childhood overweight and obesity is a problem globally, not only in South Africa. The World Health Organization reported that between 1990 and 2013, childhood overweight and obesity stats more than doubled. In South Africa, the stats are also quite alarming. It's in a recent national survey, it was reported that 1 in 5 boys and 1 in 4 girls is overweight or obese. South Africa has what we would call an obesogenic environment, which means that there are many factors contributing to childhood overweight and obesity. For example, there's been a history of poverty and a lack of education around health, and that coupled with an increased urbanization, a more sedentary lifestyle, and more exposure to things like the advertising of junky foodstuffs and availability of those foodstuffs for children to purchase daily. All of those factors together mean that children are more vulnerable to being overweight or obese.
My name is Jacqueline Ellis. I'm married with 2 kids. Jody is 14 and Zia is turning 7 years old. For Zia that goes to primary school, I normally pack her 2 slices of bread. She likes cheese, she likes bologna. And then Jody's different. Jody's at high school. So she wants money to go to the tuck shop to buy chips. She does not want to take sandwiches.
I usually eat from the tuck shops. In the morning I normally buy my sweets, and then intervals I buy my chips. Sometimes I drink sodas and fizzy drinks.
She wants to go to the tuck shop together with her friends at intervals and buy the chips and buy the fizzy cool drinks and things like that. It's cheap enough and it's affordable for them to buy.
Tuck shop versus lunchbox, it very much depends on the tuck shop. So if the tuck shop is extremely well managed and the school is great about ensuring that there are healthy options there and that the unhealthy options are actually absent, then the children can make choices around various healthy options. children are going to buy sweets and chips if those are available and they have money to go to the tuck shop because they taste nice. So if those options are there, the children will buy them. If they're not there, then children will buy other things.
I do think kids have more access to fizzy drinks and sodas and chocolates and sweets because it's available to them at school. Even on their way to school, the tuck shops is open, so even if the school doesn't have one, they can get one on the way to school. So I do think that even if the parents put in a healthy snack, rather not give them spending money because they're going to end up buying sweet things that they should not even do.
Well, the awareness that we have now is that if obesity rates continue to increase as they are now, there will be about 3.91 million children who are overweight or obese by 2025. So if we don't intervene now on all levels, so individually in our homes and as a government and as schools, then we will have an increasing problem as these children grow up and as more children are coming through the system.
All right, so overweight and obesity impacts on a child's quality of life, including physical, psychological, and health consequences, as we've just had. Now, to learn more about this problem, it's a great pleasure to welcome into our studio. First up is Dr. Wendy Duncan. Now, Dr. Wendy Duncan is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and she's based at the Oxford Healthcare Centre in Saxonwold. And I might as well just add that, she is president-elect of the South African Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Welcome to Health Talk, Dr. Duncan. All right, and next to her is another, perhaps usual face to some that may know her. She's been on our show 1 or 2 times before. Ria Katsikas. Now, Ria is a clinical dietitian and nutritional consultant, and she's also founding partner of Nutritional Solutions, and is based also in Sandton, correct?
Yes.
Welcome to Health Talk once again.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and then last but not least is another special guest, Sue Jones. Sue is the Health and Nutrition Program Manager at Save the Children South Africa. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much.
All right, ladies, let's now talk about this issue of childhood obesity, overweight and obesity. Perhaps let's start by the basics. What are we talking about? For adults, it's very easy, but for children, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about the accumulation of abnormal or excessive weight, fat, in children to such an extent that it impacts on the health and well-being of the child.
Right.
From a numerical perspective, we use the measures of the so-called body mass index, which is the ratio of weight to height. Mm-hmm. And these are plotted in accordance to the child's age and gender, because bearing in mind that children are growing and developing constantly. And typically we would say a body mass index beyond the 95th percentile or beyond 95% of what other children for that age and gender are presenting with.
So obviously for adults, it's a simple calculation to make, but for children perhaps a bit more difficult. So for parents watching this show, if you track your child from birth right through to adolescence, what's the best way to do that?
One can start from birth by clinic visits,
okay.
And I think many parents do start with the clinic visits
right.
and the Road to Health chart,
okay.
on which the nurse will plot the child's length, the child's weight, and
okay. So it's from that Road to Health chart that you can see whether the child is normal.
That's where we start, absolutely. Right. And then later on it gets a bit more difficult because we have growth charts available to us, but these are not necessarily charts that are normed for African children. They're charts that are normed for American children. And quite commonly we use the CDC, the Center for Disease Control's charts.
Yeah.
And then we can plot the body mass index of the child. And this would give us an indication.
Okay, let's get a perspective from Save the Children South Africa. Now, Sue, how big is this? In my introduction I said a quarter of all overweight children under the age of 5 live in Africa, which is quite alarming. What is the extent of this problem in South Africa?
In South Africa there are approximately about 18 million children, and we're looking at up to about 20% of those being overweight. Now, if you look at the age range between 2 to 5, then you are looking at about 20%. If you're looking at slightly older children up to the age of 10, we're still looking at 17 to 20%. Once they reach adolescent period, up to the age of 15 is really where I have the data from, then we're looking at children, girls being more overweight than boys. So girls being approximately 15% overweight in that age range, and boys being approximately 7 to 8%. So you are finding it in adolescence more girls being overweight than boys. So if you look at the total number of children in South Africa, we are now, as one of the presenters was saying earlier, looking towards there being almost 3 to 4 million children being overweight by 2020.
It's quite alarming. Ria, I mean, obviously you deal a lot with parents that I would imagine come to you for advice in terms of their children being a bit overweight or obese. What are the trends that you're seeing in your practice?
Children obesity is actually a family problem. It is not the child per se that should be put on a diet. And what the research shows us is that often the mothers are also overweight. So, so it is the family that need to start making healthier choices in terms of the types of food the family eats. The times, often you find there's very little structure, there's continuous snacking, meal times get neglected.
We're going to come to that just now, but so what you're essentially saying is that
to the family and all siblings, mothers often say, but my other child is thin. And what we need to realize is that all children should eat healthy, independent of weight. So it's education in terms of the whole family that need to start eating healthier.
Okay, so what I pick up from what you're saying is that you're seeing children that are brought to you for advice being brought by actually overweight parents.
Absolutely.
And other siblings.
Absolutely.
Why should we worry about this? What is the consequences of a child being overweight and obese?
Well, as your insert showed us, the consequences are quite far-reaching, starting with physical consequences, which have impacts in childhood, impact from an emotional perspective, a physical perspective. They also have an impact in childhood from a social perspective. So the physical consequences, which can endure into adulthood, and then from my perspective, obviously the emotional impact and the burden of low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and impact educationally, because these young folks may well develop very severe sleep disorders, which are then going to impact on daytime functioning, capacity to focus, participate in the learning environment, and partake in their world on a day-to-day basis.
In the insert that we played earlier, there was reference to, these children being bullied at school because, they sin as being abnormal and that sort of thing. So that's really what you're talking to in terms of, emotional affect, isn't it? So?
Absolutely. So bullying is a huge problem for these children. What's also interesting is they may then turn the situation around and become bullies themselves. Either way, they're ending up socially ostracized and emotionally worse off because of the obesity.
Globally, what impact are you seeing? I'll come... Or perhaps let's start with you, Ria.
From a physical point of view, they've done a study in the UK. They called it the early bird study. And we always think, blood pressure and cardiovascular disease only happen later in life. What they actually found with that particular study was that these obese children had already high blood pressure, already impaired glucose tolerance. So that means that the pancreas had difficulty to metabolize glucose, and cardiovascular lesions. And that was done with children between about 9 and 12 years old.
All right. Maybe at this point, I know that I've asked you, what your view is, but perhaps we'll do that just after the break. Okay, it's time for a quick commercial break. After the break, we now focus on causes and risk factors. Please stay with us.
Shield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est bon.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
Africa remains in the grip of a dry spell. It's led to water restrictions imposed across the country. About 20,000 cubic centimeters are being released per second. Authorities say that it could take 10 days. In the meantime, they're appealing to residents to use water sparingly. Transnet says that it's increased its revenue despite the weak economic conditions affecting volumes that it handled.
The company says going forward it will be investing in mergers and acquisition opportunities to expand Transnet services. It says while it does not believe South Africa will be downgraded, it has however begun negotiations with lenders to prepare for any eventualities.
Animation, virtual reality and games. We have all of that and other technology and social media news.
I've got the full version of the game at home, so I play it a lot at home.
We also tell you how Africans are using tech to improve their lives.
We have to close the digital gap.
So join us on Network for your African technology and social media news. That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
Welcome back. We're talking childhood obesity with my special guest, Dr. Wendy Duncan, a child and adolescent psychiatrist based at the Oxford Healthcare Centre in Sandton, Ria Katsikas, clinical dietitian and nutritional consultant from Nutritional Solutions, also based in Sandton, and Sue Jones, health and nutrition program manager, Save the Children SA. Perhaps let's stay with you, Sue. We were talking just now in terms of the impact that obesity has on children. Just before we start talking about causes and risk factors, from your perspective, what impact are you seeing?
We're seeing a massive impact globally. I mean, let's talk about South Africa because it's a transitioning country. So we are still seeing children who are underweight, children with severe acute malnutrition. And then on the other side of the scale, we're looking at children who are becoming overweight and obese. So, and that really, if you look at the statistics, is actually overtaking the undernutrition issues in this country. So, and because of that, we're looking at, an increase in non-communicable diseases, as my colleagues were saying. And I think, South Africa it's so complicated in this country. We've had obviously a big issue with HIV. We've had a big issue with children dying of communicable diseases. We're going to be seeing, younger adults, middle-aged people now dying more of non-communicable diseases. So life expectancy on one side has improved, but we might see it getting worse in the future because of these non-communicable diseases. Your
example is the fact that diabetes is seen more and more in children, and which is obviously a worrying trend. Now let's get back to causes and risk factors. Are there any genetic risk factors for childhood obesity? I mean, Ria earlier, alluded to the fact that children are brought by, in fact, obese parents. Is there a genetic link?
I mean, there certainly is. And with the advancement of science and the advancement of the genetic understanding of disease, I think they're coming into contact with more and more gene loci and chromosomal abnormalities that suggest that there's a heritable component. There are, of course, unusual situations where we've got chromosomal abnormalities, and these are a rarity. Conditions like the Prader-Willi syndrome, where there is already a pre-existing genetic vulnerability to obesity and overweight. But certainly in families, obese parents have obese children.
But perhaps one might argue that it may not necessarily be genetic, but more, mainly lifestyle kind of issues.
We often talk about the genes sort of loading the gun and the environment pulling the trigger.
Right.
And so there's a genetic vulnerability that doesn't necessarily have to manifest itself should the environment support the child.
All right, okay. So environmental factors now, lifestyle. You earlier suggested that perhaps it's more lifestyle and,
it's
in a family environment.
And there's many factors that contribute.
Right.
They did a study where they interviewed 8,000 households that was representative of the demographics of South Africa. They called it the South African National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And what they found was that poverty, to a certain extent, is a risk factor. That 34% of children don't have enough food in their houses. They don't eat breakfast, for example. They also found that 64% of parents identified cost as the main important factor when they buy food. Only 14% identified health as a factor they consider when they buy food. Lack of knowledge was identified as a big factor. They did a study with the children where they had to identify healthy foods, and the score they need to reach was 4, and only 0.9% of the children reached the score, where 72% of the children reached a score between 1 and 2. And then there's the urbanization, as Sue has mentioned, the transition.
That is an interesting one because, and perhaps linking to the issue of the cost, we see that this problem, tends to affect low-income and middle-income, countries such as Asia and Africa, for instance. Why is that? Because, there are some people that might argue that, lower cost would probably get you food that's not necessarily unhealthy. That it's the more processed foods that, in fact, are more expensive than the healthier foods. Your comment on that?
I think for me it's all about food choices as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's about the availability of the food.
Yeah.
With Save South Africa, I travel a lot, through all the different communities. And every town I go to, there is fast food. And I think just the availability of that and the advertising of the fast food is very influential.
Yeah.
And it's not that expensive. Yeah. So I think what we need to do, and I know we'll talk about this later, is really think about, what value can we get from the money that people earn in terms of buying healthy food.
Yeah.
Can I also mention that they found with this particular study there's a positive correlation between working hours of mothers and obese children, linking up to the fast foods. And the unhealthy food, they are cheaper. Also, what was interesting from this study was that although 60% of the adults were overweight and obese, their perception was that they thought they were not overweight. So there is, what's very important, I think there is definitely a lack of knowledge, not in terms of food, but the importance of obesity as a health risk for disease. People don't realize that if you carry these abdominal fat, that it can actually be...
We're going to come back to...
That they are at risk.
Some of those unhealthy foods that you referred to, perhaps practical examples. But Dr. Duncan, let's just talk about this whole notion that I mean clearly nutrition on the one hand, but physical activity. Perhaps let's try and track it from early childhood. Is there a problem? Are we starting to see a bit of a problem there?
Certainly, there's no doubt that we're seeing increasingly more sedentary lifestyles in our children. And this is across the socioeconomic spectrum. So with the increased availability of television, the cheaper access to devices and electronic media, we're seeing children, again, making choices to be less and less active. And I think, as has been indicated, as parents are more needing to be in the marketplace and needing to be at work, there's less parental supervision of activities. And the choice is to, or the default is to go for the more sedentary activity. So
we didn't talk about breastfeeding very early on. How important is that in the development of childhood obesity?
It's extremely important.
Right.
I think across the board breastfeeding is important for health. But in terms of obesity, there are pardon me, positive associations in terms of a healthier habitus with breastfeeding.
Right. Let's get back to those unhealthy food choices that you referred to. What sort of examples have you got?
You know, just to sort of mention maybe the small child, they did find very important that also early introduction, too early introduction of solid foods, energy dense food, contribute to obesity. And what we encourage now mothers to do is to breastfeed exclusively till 6 months, and then to start to introduce solid foods.
What about sugary foods?
What happened now with the small children is instead of water, often they get rooibos tea with sugar. They get diluted condensed milk, often granola or creamers. They get diluted fruit juice instead of water. And if we look at older children in terms of the food, it's soft drinks I have identified as a particular food item that definitely contribute to obesity, as 1 tin of soft drinks contains 7 teaspoons of sugar.
Quick fix solutions, I imagine. All right. Maybe on this note, let's take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we now get practical and say, what can we do to try and prevent this problem, starting with early childhood? Please stay with us.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well. MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
Failure to implement the water restriction is going to make the system not workable. For the domestic use, everyone should not exceed 25 kiloliters per day.
What is the penalty, and how much have you raked in thus far as a municipality?
For domestic users, if they exceed 25 kiloliters, then they're going to be charged a penalty on their monthly bill. And so far already we've collected 1.7 million.
The 200 million rand state-of-the-art school in Magaliesburg had been vandalized by drug addicts. How bad is it?
It's very bad. Into the hostel residents, it was even worse because there the doors, the wardrobes, the beds, the ceiling were broken down. Showers were ripped off, and it couldn't be used by students who are actually using that particular boarding facility.
Welcome back. We're talking childhood obesity, and with me is 3 special guests. Dr. Wendy Duncan, child and adolescent psychiatrist based in Sandton at the Oxford Healthcare Centre. Ria Katikas, dietitian from Nutritional Solutions, also based in Sandton. And Sue Jones, health and nutrition program manager, Save the Children SA. Now, obviously we've laid out the story now around, what actually causes or what are the risk factors. Now let's try and help people that are watching out there to say, all right, let's come practical solutions, and let's start early on. We mentioned a little bit the importance of breastfeeding, perhaps just to re-emphasize,
Certainly, I think And it revolves, I think, around education.
Right.
So it starts prenatally. I think it starts when the young mother falls pregnant. That education should be given around healthy nutrition during pregnancy, around breastfeeding once the infant is born, around reduction of stress. There's some evidence to show that stress and the abnormal metabolism of fats and sugars starts in utero. So these are vital things in our country, which is particularly stressed.
Okay, so we mentioned the importance of, you know, family setup and lifestyle there. An opportunity perhaps to educate the parents, you know, adults, in terms of these risk factors. Yeah, your view on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that, you know, especially for the younger children, that's where the education needs to be with the caregivers, with the parents. I mean, I guess the way to prevent obesity and overweight is multifactorial. So it's not just about getting the parents and the caregivers involved, it's really about the whole community. We have to really, you know, increase the awareness of what is good and optimal nutrition for the community, you know, from birth. We've actually, in South Africa, we've just had the World Breastfeeding Conference. So it's excellent timing for talking about breastfeeding and the importance of breastfeeding because, you know, as Wendy said, it reduces, you know, the risk of obesity. So that's really important. But at the same time, breastfeeding itself is very, very difficult and it needs a lot of support. So really one of the key messages that came from the conference was we have to give mothers that support when they leave the facility. And then that would help in the whole multifactorial process of reducing obesity. Yeah,
perhaps let's get practical in terms of, you know, I mean, you do get, especially in the, you know, major towns and cities, working mums, you know, that have young babies. Practically, what can they do to ensure that nutrition is optimal for the baby?
See, we talk about responsive feeding, and what the research tells us that mothers often decide how much children should eat, and what the research tells us is that parents are responsible to provide a variety of healthy, unprocessed food to children. They don't actually need to buy special baby food. They need to eat the food that the family eats, that's healthy food, mashed up. Working mothers can freeze, and that comes all with education. And there's a window period from 6 months to a year where small children are quite responsive to different tastes and textures, and you need to introduce as much variety of foods, mashed pilchards, wild brown rice. They don't have to eat bottled food, processed foods. And then leave it to the children to decide how much they want, and not force feed, and be aware and be educated in terms of portions that's appropriate for the children's age.
Earlier you mentioned sweetened drinks and rooibos putting sugar. So what are you saying? People shouldn't be putting sugar in rooibos tea?
No, they should not be putting sugar in rooibos tea. We all get born with an innate taste for sweetness, and often what happens, it's practical that children are crying, and we all probably guilty that we try to comfort the children with food. We reward children with food. And when we taste something sweet, it's nice. But what's happening as a children from a very small age, the amount of sugar that they then consume is far more than what they should consume from a health point of view.
Supermarkets. There was discussion around the issue, you know, about supermarkets. I think somebody described this country as diabetogenic or something, you know, that if you walk around the aisles of a supermarket, there's all sorts of sweets laid out there. And if you're walking around with children, I mean, it says basically, grab me. And there was a suggestion that perhaps these should be banned. In fact, one of the major chain stores had announced that, in fact, they'll be removing these sweets from their aisles, but obviously we don't see that. Your view on that?
Personally, I don't think that sweets should be removed 100%. You know, I think as part of an overall balanced diet, as a very small part of that, I don't see a problem. I think the issue that you're talking about is that in supermarkets, these sweet stalls tend to be where you are exiting and waiting in the queue. For me, that's the issue, because then, you know, even the parent will be tempted. So of course the child has to wait in a queue. It's boring. So they're nagging the parent. I think, you know, if that was one big change that could make that wasn't there, perhaps put healthy food, healthy snacks. That would encourage people.
Let's talk about early childhood. Yeah, we can talk nutrition, but in terms of physical activity. Somebody argued that, you know, if you introduce physical activity from as early as, you know, 8 months, you know, around a year, that will have huge benefits in future. Your view on that?
Certainly. Children by their very nature are going to be on the move. They're going to be crawling, they're going to be wanting to explore, they're going to be wanting to run and get going. And what this would involve is the participation of the caregivers, be it the parents, be it the creche teacher, nursery school teacher, climbing, running, jumping. That's what children are naturally inclined to want to do. It's when there is reduced participation, I think, of parents and caregivers, that children get put in front of a device as a parenting tool. And then we run into trouble.
Children starting school, in terms of the food that they get exposed to at school, perhaps at home is one thing. I think we've spent quite a bit of time talking about food at home. Let's talk about away from home now.
There was a study done in the Western Cape where they actually interviewed 100 schools. They called it a health kick study, and they found that the two most popular items that get sold by at tuck shops was potato crisps and sweets and soft drinks, were the three most popular items. They also found that in the study they talked about the whole environment that children are exposed to is that 50% of the schools had advertisements of Coca-Cola. So when you're looking at schools, it is a huge effort. It have to come from the principal, where the teachers need to start eating healthy. They need to change the tuck shops completely to get mothers to actually probably cook proper food for the children. They need to go as far to look at the vendors, because they need to make a living, and they sell Vet Cook and Bunny Chows and all those fast foods just next to the school ground. So they need to become part of the solution, and a whole school. And there are some private initiatives that has shown to be very successful if everyone comes on board, and there need to be a whole culture attitude that need to change towards everyone eating healthy, from the principal to the lady who cook. And the schools I found in the community can do wonderful work, bringing parents in terms of hosting talks to parents of healthy eating, to do cooking demonstrations to mothers in terms of what to do if your time is limited, and how to feed the family healthy.
This is indeed a serious problem. I think we need to continue discussion on this, but that after the break. So after the break, we'll continue our discussion on prevention of obesity, this time around older children and adolescents. Please stay with us.
Embracing our members in good health since 1968. If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
There may be associated problem with the arteries of the heart in patients with hypertensive heart disease, and in some instances it's just pure the muscle disease problem. The statistics show us that half the population of individuals with high blood pressure are not even aware that they've got high blood pressure.
There's the amount of salt we eat, because there's a big influence on our blood pressure levels. So using less salt when you're cooking, less salty spices when you're cooking, not adding salt at the table, but rather using other spices and herbs to flavor your food. And then of course how much sugar you eat is also very important.
If you start becoming uncomfortable, or where you feel that your effort tolerance is becoming less, you can't lie flat, you run short of breath, you start swelling in the legs and so on, it's high time that one should consult a doctor.
Join Health Talk every Saturday for all your health news.
keeping you up to date with business developments.
So there's no shortage of money in the system. There's a shortage of implementation capacity to actually get things done.
Always on point with news of the day.
May has promised radical social and economic reforms, fueling speculation over the future of current senior figures.
On the ball every time with all sports codes.
The Joburg side already have a quarter-final at home, and a victory against the Argentines will ensure home semi-final.
Accurate weather updates after every bulletin. Stay tuned to News Today at 3 p.m. from Monday to Friday on SABC News.
The Kalahari Transportier Park is a large wildlife preserve and conservation area in southern Africa. Kalahari means place of thirst. The total area is 38,000 square kilometers. Approximately 3/4 of the park lie in Botswana and 1/4 in South Africa. South Africa embraced the concept of transportiers linking ecological reserves across national borders. On the 12th of May 2000, President Festus Mogae of Botswana and Thabo Mbeki of South Africa formally launched South Africa's first peace park. It has 200 species of birds, including vultures, mammalians such as black Kalahari lions, and large herds of herbivores, namely elands, springboks, blue velvet ears, and more.
Welcome back. So let's talk more about, prevention of childhood obesity. My three special guests, Dr. Wendy Duncan, child and adolescent psychiatrist based at the Oxford Healthcare Centre in Saxonwold; Ria Katsikas, dietitian from Nutritional Solutions in Sandton; and Sue Jones, Health and Nutrition Program Manager, Save the Children SA. Let's start with you. I know that you've got some samples that you're going to show us, but a bit later. But as you get them. Sue, she mentioned the issue of, tuck shops and so on, that perhaps, there should be some way that we can force the schools, to serve, obviously, more healthier foodstuffs in there. But the reality is that in some schools, we're not bashing Coca-Cola necessarily, but the example that was mentioned is that, schools don't have funding, and they get sponsorships, for Coca-Cola or any other company for that matter to have a sign out there. It means that, they put in a little bit of money in there to help the school on other matters. So I would imagine it's understandable that you'd find some of these products there. So do you think this should be regulated? Schools should be forced into changing what they serve children?
I don't think they should be forced. Perhaps that's too strong a word, but
Right.
I think that the policies should be enforced.
Right.
The Department of Education has a national schools nutrition program,
Right.
and that has various parts to it. For example, they provide they provide food for the low-income schools, but there's also health education that goes through the life skills curriculum. There should also be an improvement in physical activity. So I think the key really is to enforce the policies, to work very closely with the people who govern the schools, so the school governing bodies, the school management teams. Educate them more, provide more information about what could potentially be the outcome if Coca-Cola are advertising outside the school.
Yeah.
So I think that would be probably the better way to do it.
Interesting. You have views on that?
I agree completely, and I think the next step beyond the nutrition is the physical activity,
Right.
is having spaces for children to play,
Right.
having spaces for children to run in, jungle gyms, sports curriculums, and accessing funding around that so that those activities and opportunities can be provided to children.
encouraging sports participation by everybody at school.
Yeah.
All right, Ria, one of the clips that we played earlier showed the whole problem around putting together a proper lunchbox for your child and at the same time giving the child a little bit of money, okay, when they go to school. With the money, obviously, they buy all sorts of stuff. Your advice to parents in terms of what they should package in a lunchbox?
My advice to parents is to first of all provide children with a good breakfast that consists of fruit and whole grain cereals, okay, that lay the foundation of the day. And then in the lunchbox, it depends on the time that the child spends at school. It should be consist of a lean protein, such as boiled eggs, pilchards. That can be combined with whole grains such as wild brown rice, unrefined maize.
You have some samples to show us.
Seed bread. What I've done here is I actually just contrast two lunch boxes. Nutrition is complex and it's a lot of education that needs to take place. But this particular lunchbox one, it's contains polony with brown bread, Viennas, and then a yogurt drink that often people perceive as quite healthy.
This appears to be the most popular one.
Yes, but it contains 40 grams sugar. That is 8 teaspoons of sugar. And I analyzed this particular lunchbox just to show that the energy for this small lunchbox, and often people get quite a lot of food, is over 3,460 kilojoules. It contains very little fiber, 2 gram fiber, 30 gram fat, and 40 gram of sugar. And then I had the healthy lunchbox that sort of represent what every single health organization in the world tell us, from the American Heart Association to the World Health Organization, that we should all eat 5 portions of fruit and veggies a day. So I use a health seed bread that contain far more fiber and veggies and fruit. And if you look at this particular lunchbox, although more food, it's lower in energy. It's 10 gram of fiber compared to 2, only 9 gram of fat and 0 sugar. And I looked only here at like few nutrients, but this particular lunchbox have far more micronutrients, vitamins and minerals that's absolutely essential for all children's health compared to this particular lunchbox that we called is very nutrient poor. Apart from the high calorie, fat and sugar content, it provided the child with no nutrients.
I'll come back to the issue of cost and taste and preference to the kids, but you wanted to say something.
I think it's really important as well to consider the psychology of the child and what's considered to be cool.
Yeah.
And this is where the education that comes in right from the get-go is really important.
Yeah.
Because what's considered to be cool is to have tuck shop money, to have the processed food, and to have the quick fix.
Yeah.
So I think that's something important to bear in mind.
Talk about tuck shop money. I mean, the reality perhaps is that a child takes to school a healthy lunchbox and has some tuck shop money. What happens? That lunchbox comes back as it is. And in fact, the child chooses then to go buy whatever stuff at the tuck shop, yeah?
It comes down to education and how people consider healthy eating.
Yeah.
And I call it treats and pleasure foods, as mentioned, is part of healthy eating. But people are eating it daily. It's not a treat anymore. It's not an exception anymore. It is the norm. And that is why children are so obese today, because these foods has become, it's supposed to be a treat, the occasional packet of chips and sweets that we eat. Children eat it daily, and it replaces the healthy food. And that's the obesity crisis we're sitting with. And parents are eating these foods on a daily basis, and it replaces the healthy food. And they consider that also as not too bad.
This is quite a complex problem. So it's parents, it is the teachers, it is the peers at school, it is the environment, in terms of the tuck shop, what's available at the tuck shop and so on. By the way, just in terms of cost of putting together that healthy lunchbox as compared to lunchbox number 1.
I didn't, in this particular case, did the costing, but I has done costings before of meals. And always if you buy fruits and vegetables in season, they are actually cheaper than the processed foods. I've looked at a meal once where soft drinks was involved and processed foods like these processed meats, they are actually more expensive than the fruit and vegetables in season. Pilchards are quite a cheap star food. Lucky Star is a star food. It is actually cheaper than the processed meats.
I need to come back to that issue of, you know, the psychology aspect of the kid. Just expand on it a bit to say, you know, how do you get the kid in a practical sense to kind of say, to understand that it may not necessarily be cool to want to eat what your friend is eating?
I suppose at the end of the day, it has to be something that's introduced from the get-go. There are, and I think particularly in South Africa, perceptions about prosperity, you know, and the yogurt which is branded is considered to be cool and associated with prosperity and wealth. So there will always be playground dynamics, and there will always be power dynamics on the playground. But it really is about right from the get-go, getting children to appreciate what is better for them.
Well, ladies, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think this has been a fascinating discussion. Viewers out there have learned quite a lot, as much as I have. And this has been Dr. Wendy Duncan, child and adolescent psychiatrist based in Oxford Healthcare Centre in Sandton. Ria Katikas, dietitian, nutritional solutions based in Sandton. And Sue Jones, health and nutrition program manager, Save the Children SA. Ladies, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's on that note that we come to the end of our show today, folks. Join us again next week on SABC News, and reminder to please share your views and comments with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. And yes, send us those tweets at Twitter at SABC Health Talk. You can watch repeats of this show, as you always can, from every Thursday morning at 5 a.m. and, of course, Saturday at 2 p.m. I'm Dr. Salom Mtagu. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, sorry, man.
Shield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well. MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health. Shield, embracing our members in good health since 1968. SMS MedShield to 33023 or talk to your broker to get your kind of care.
Give me that paperwork.
Where is your
Give me that paperwork.
Where is your paperwork?
Like I'm saying, I don't know what's going on. Suddenly I'm locked up.
This is not fair, Santa Dosezan. Not fair.
Ukuputse rent ka 200. Habitse kupula ka 200. Uri ngwana uyi 150 plus koloi leone tlamehile in another 150.
I'm just the one to lock you out.
Yes, you just want to lock me then out.
You are starting gangsterism.
No.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.